Jai Gurudev, and welcome to Chapter 5, Karma Sannyasa Yoga. The chapter begins with a question from Arjuna, much like Chapter 3. So, Arjuna says, Krishna, you recommend the renunciation of action, and at the same time instruct me on Karma Yoga. Tell me conclusively, which is the better of the two? So he's saying again, similar question to Chapter 3, the renunciation of action, Jnana Yoga, contemplation, analysis, to retreat the limbs into our being like a tortoise, right? Don't engage with the sense objects. At the same time, you're instructing me about Karma Yoga, that Karma Yoga is what I should be doing. Don't act with detachment, act with a spirit of sacrifice, etc., in Chapter 3. So definitively, really, conclusively, which is the better of the two? Now, verse number 2, Krishna answers, renunciation of action and Karma Yoga both lead to the highest state. But of the two, Karma Yoga is superior to the renunciation of action. So, obviously important statements here. On the one hand, they both lead to the same result. Brahma Gyan, the highest state of realization that one can have within oneself. So, Jnana Yoga and Karma Yoga, remember that I said that Krishna seems to equate the renunciation of action with the path traditionally known as Jnana Yoga and the engagement of action, but in a specific way, as Karma Yoga. And so he says Jnana Yoga and Karma Yoga lead to the same state, but amongst the two, Karma Yoga is the superior one. Now, why is that? So, in verse number 4 and 5, Krishna says, only the inexperienced speak of Jnana Yoga and Karma Yoga as separate. One who is firmly established in either path attains the fruit of both. That state, verse 5, that state which is attained by the Jnana Yogi is also attained by the Karma Yogi. The one who sees that both are really one is truly wise. Verse 6, but renunciation is hard to achieve without Karma Yoga. The sage who follows this yoga quickly attains realization. So we see here, he says that the wise see that they are ultimately the same, because what are they achieving? What are they actually trying to do? Jnana Yoga is essentially an introspective path of rejecting that which is unreal, that which is binding, and says, I'm going to find who I truly am beneath these false layers of my material self. Yes, I have senses, but I am not these senses, so who am I? Who governs these senses ultimately? The mind. Let's go one layer deeper. Who governs the mind? The soul. That's who I am. Who governs the soul? But that's for later. And so the Jnana Yoga result is soul knowledge, soul realization, Brahma Gyan. The Karma Yogi says, I am acting for myself, and this creates suffering and unhappiness and bondage, frustration, anger, desires, etc. How do I become free of this? So I act out of sacrifice, out of service, without attachment. As I do that, my karma starts to burn up. As my karma burns up, I become free. I am no longer bound by my material vessel. And what does one discover when he is freed from his material conditioning? The self. And so Brahma Gyan is once again the outcome of Karma Yoga. It's just that the methodology of the two is different. The intention and outcome is non-different. And so this is the similarity that ultimately Krishna is speaking about. He's not saying that the methodology is equal, but he says that the purpose and outcome of them is equal. And so in that sense, only the inexperienced speak of them as fundamentally being different, because the outcomes are actually the same. However, Karma Yoga is the better choice. Why? Because it is easier. He says renunciation is hard to achieve without Karma Yoga, because it is in our nature as human beings to act. So isn't it better to just learn how to act rather than stopping to act altogether? So renouncing the fruits of our actions, renouncing our material desires, etc., it's easier to do that by acting in a detached way than by stopping altogether. And he says the sage who follows this quickly attains realization. It's a quicker, more effective, easier path. Good. So then we go to verse number 8. And in verse number 8, Krishna says the following. Despite seeing, hearing, touching, smelling, eating, moving, sleeping, and breathing. The one who is engaged in yoga practice and sees the truth declares within himself, I do nothing. And so he lists out all of the fundamental actions. Notice how he really lists the fundamental actions, not unnecessary actions. So I repeat, seeing, hearing, touching, smelling, eating, moving, sleeping, and breathing. One who is engaged in the yoga practice, karma yoga, for example, jnana yoga, for example, and sees the truth, has Brahma Gyan, sees that I am actually a soul, such a person can declare, I do nothing. Because in seeing that separation of soul and body, they understand that these functions which belong to the body are not belonging to the soul, and the soul is different and distinct from the body. And so because you are now situated in the identity of the soul as distinct from the body, you look at these activities of the regular human condition and say, I am not the one doing them because I am not the body. I am the soul. So the body is doing them, but I'm not. So I cannot attribute those actions to me. And that's an important realization that is unique to one who has the soul perspective. As long as you have the body perspective, the mind perspective, all of those things will always be yours because you are the agent of action. But the soul is not the agent of action. Verse number 9 just goes to clarify that even further. Even while speaking, releasing, grasping, opening and closing the eyes, he is always aware it is just the senses operating among sense objects. So it's like you're a spectator to your own life. You almost become this spiritual term, this famous spiritual term, the observer. And so you step into yourself and you watch and you realize that all of these basic functions are your senses, your body, your mind, engaging with their sense objects. It is a direct and simple interaction between these two categories. But you are something different. You transcend both of those. And we're going to jump to verse 14 to understand the relationship between that who you truly are, the self, and the body. Verse 14, Krishna says, the master of the body, the self, does not initiate activities, nor does it induce people to act, nor does it create the fruits of action. It is a person's inherent nature that does all of this. So, two statements here. First, your soul is the master of the body, and it does not cause action in the body. The body has its own mechanisms for acting, and it is not the soul which creates the results of action either. That is also happening on a different platform. But then, if it's not, then what is? And he says that it is a person's inherent nature. So what is our inherent nature? It is the guna that predominates over the individual. At each moment of our existence, we find ourselves in a particular guna arrangement. We have three gunas that dictate material reality. Those are the guna of sattva, rajas, and tamas. Sattva is the guna of purity, rajas of passion and activity, and tamas of negligence and ignorance. So these three exist in all facets of reality, material reality, in different configurations. And according to that configuration, that object will give out a particular experience, a particular activity. So we are non-different. So in any given moment, any action we perform is motivated or induced by the gunas which are predominating over us in that particular moment. Now, this isn't to say that we cannot change this configuration. Of course we can. Many activities and things that we do contribute to the state of guna that we find ourselves in at any given moment. So for sure, that can be altered. But nonetheless, when Krishna says it is a person's inherent nature that does all this, meaning initiates activities and induces people to act, it is the guna. And also creates the fruit of action. It is the guna that predominates over us, or the configuration of gunas which predominate over us in that moment. And the proper way to understand this is that if you act out of a sattvic sense, the result of your action might be better than if you act out of a tamasic one. So in that way, it's affecting the fruits of your action also. If you are in a sattvic state, then you might initiate one type of activity. If you're in a tamasic state, you might initiate a different one. For example, if I'm in a predominantly sattvic state because I've been carefully monitoring my activities, etc., then I might sit in my room and think, I have half an hour free. What should I do? And I'll pick up my japa mala, or I'll practice some kriya, or I'll study. But if I'm tamasic in that moment, I'll say, I'll take a nap. And you just go and sleep for half an hour, for example. Simple examples that showcase how the inherent nature that we find ourselves with at that precise moment dictates and induces one to act. In verse 18, this is another famous verse. Krishna says the following. It is a verse of equality, or rather, as I prefer it, the state of equanimity. The sages perceive with equal vision a good and learned Brahmana, a cow, an elephant, a dog, and a dog-eater. So the sages perceive with equal vision a good and learned Brahmana, item number 1, a cow, item number 2, an elephant, item number 3, a dog, item number 4, and a dog-eater, item number 5. Now that dog-eater, I'm assuming, is a human who eats dogs rather than another animal that happens to eat dogs. Now, he sees all of these 5 equally. How is that possible? Because, first of all, are they all the same? No. No two human beings are the same. We are all unique and distinct, and we all have different characteristics, let alone different personalities, traits, activities, etc. All 5 of these elements, all 5 of these persons are clearly different and distinct. No two people are the same. We all have different personalities, characteristics, skill sets, etc. So there can be no question of people being identical. And so for us to be seen in an equal way, there has to be another factor which superimposes itself over it as a value assessment. So what I mean by that is, for example, if somebody says to me, I would like a fruit, and I offer them a pineapple, a peach, a strawberry, and a grape, they will objectively see them all equally as being fruits. And so they are all fruits with an equal vision. There's an equanimity of fruit, so to speak. But they are all very, very different, very distinct, with different flavor profiles, different characteristics, different nutritional values, etc., etc. So there can be no comparison and no question of their being the same, but they are still viewed equally as fruits, because the value judgment, the assessment is, are they fruit, right? So similarly, when we see a Brahmana, a dog-eater, a dog, a cow, etc., they're all what? Material beings. Are they different types of material beings? Sure. But fundamentally, as an umbrella category, they are material. And so when somebody is pursuing spiritual nature, spiritual reality, then everything which is material is equally uninteresting. Whether it is gold or dust, it's both not spiritual. So, for example, if I'm seeking that particular specific treasure, right, and I'm confronted by 2 other treasures, no matter how nice and valuable they may be, I'm equally uninterested in both because they're not the one that I'm actually seeking. So I have an equal vision towards both, despite them not being the same. And this is a really helpful tool to understand, because one thing human beings struggle with on the spiritual path, when they are told to be equanimous, when they are told to enter into the state of equanimity, is that they'll look at friends and enemies and attractive people and less attractive people and tasty food and less tasty food and all of these things and think, how am I supposed to see these things as being equal? They are objectively not. And you're right. Nobody's asking you to let go of objectivity and to let go of the very clear and functional discernment that you have that allows you to see black and white as 2 distinct colors. It is by understanding the purpose of your spiritual life and what it is that you're truly in pursuit of that you will come to a place where seeing these things in an equanimous state becomes natural and uncomplicated. For example, if I enter into the temple with a conviction of, I want to sing God's names, then whether it is one bhajan or another bhajan or this melody or that melody, I see them equally because the objective is God's names. So as long as God's names are there, there is no issue for me. And therefore the whole process becomes simplified and I become able to express my devotion when an excellent song is performed just as much as when a less good song is performed in terms of musicality. Why? Because the point of what I'm doing is chanting God's name, and that is consistent in the good song and the bad song. And so there are easy ways to shortcut this process of equal vision, what we call in Sanskrit samadarshanam. To have the equal vision means to have a value judgment or a value assessment or an objective that facilitates the perception of things as being equally helpful or equally functional or equally unhelpful towards a particular objective. So, for example, people say, God loves us all equally. Yes, he does, because we are all objectively fragments of himself. So he loves us all equally, yes. Does he therefore have to treat us all equally? No, because we are objectively different people who behave in a different way and therefore require different treatment. And those things are compatible. To say that he loves us all equally and yet treats us all differently are fully compatible things if we understand what those words actually mean. So chapter 5, verse 18, this verse on equanimity, is a powerful verse and an important verse, but it has to be understood in its right way so that we can then be applied in our day-to-day life in the right way. For example, democracy often exists rooted on this principle of equanimity. Every single person within the democratic institute gets a vote. There is no distinction of the intelligence of the person or lack thereof, the qualification of the person or lack thereof. They are all seen as people of equal value. Why? Because they are members of that democratic institute. Simple. So, for example, for me to vote in the Brazilian elections, I can do so whether I am informed about Brazilian politics or not. Why? Because I am a Brazilian citizen. And so because of that, I can vote. That is my qualifying factor. So the criteria for voting is citizenship of a particular country. That is the equal vision filter. So through that, all other distinctions and differentiations between people are eliminated. They are brought onto one equal platform. Now, whether you agree with that or not is a completely different argument, and I leave that up to you. But I'm just giving examples of how equality can be reached amongst distinct and different people without eliminating their individuality. Good. So then the next verse that I want to look at is verse number 20. One who neither rejoices at gaining what is pleasant, nor grieves at receiving what is unpleasant, whose mind is fixed and undiluted. He has knowledge of the self and he dwells in the self. So what Krishna is really saying is that one is the consequence of another. If you are able to neither rejoice at gaining what is pleasant, meaning fulfilling your desires, nor do you grieve, do you lament, which is the opposite of rejoicing, at receiving what you do not desire, whose mind is fixed and undiluted. Now, undiluted is a very big umbrella term, because undiluted about what? We assume, given the subject matter of the first 5 chapters, undiluted about the true nature of action and the true nature of who you are, then such a person undoubtedly has self-realization or has self-knowledge, dwells in the self. There is no other place you can dwell if you have been able to master your mind and establish yourself in wisdom and be undiluted by the various, let's say, dualities and attractions and aversions of this world. So this is also, in a sense, useful because it describes the symptom of one who dwells in the self. So again, one who dwells in the self is has a fixed mind, meaning controlled, because it's fixed. So if it's fixed, it means you are in control of it. Undiluted, so not ignorant, and has no particular reaction to gaining that which one would desire and avoiding that which, or rather to receive that which one does not desire either. So there is one ingredient, basically, that has been key to all of this process, and that is acceptance. Paramahamsa Krishnananda has often mentioned in his satsangs that what differentiates a sincere spiritual practitioner and a regular person is just how much acceptance the spiritual person is capable of infusing into their everyday life circumstances. So, for example, when pleasant things come, they accept, but when the unpleasant ones come, they equally accept. And that is the hallmark of the spiritual person. Everybody is good at accepting good things. That's not unique to spiritual people. Anybody accepts good things when it comes to them. The problem is you can observe what happens to people when the not good things come into their life. Then they struggle. They don't accept. So they enter into a state of rebellion, of remorse and sadness. And this fluctuation of experiences is the hallmark of the human condition that Arjuna is trying to change and that Krishna is trying to correct in him. Verse 22. The pleasures that arise from contact with the external world are a source of suffering. They have a beginning and an end, O Arjuna, and so the wise do not rejoice in them. Powerful, powerful verse. So what does he say here? The pleasures that arise from contact with the external world are a source of suffering, full stop. So pleasures, he confirms they are pleasures at first, but they end up acting as a source, meaning a point of origin of suffering. So suffering that we experience has its origin in that which we would originally label as pleasure. And that is scary because obviously we as human beings are, to some unfortunate degree, simple-minded. We enjoy something, we want it, we like it. And so we do it, we engage with it. We feel pleasure, good, I want to repeat that. But we don't often think deeply about things and we're not analytical, self-analytical, self-aware, introspective. And so we fail to observe a lot of these patterns that are established in our being, and we end up repeating the same mistakes time and time and time again. So this is one of them. We seek pleasure because it makes us feel good, but we fail to understand that that very source of pleasure that made us feel good becomes the source of the suffering which makes us feel bad and consequently look for more sources of pleasure. And so it is an absolutely vicious cycle, a never-ending cycle. I want pleasure, I acquire pleasure. That pleasure becomes my source of suffering. Because I'm suffering, I want more pleasure. And therefore the cycle goes on and on and on. And this is specifically mentioned by Krishna as the pleasures that arise from contact with the external world. He doesn't say all forms of pleasure, because there are other pleasures that can be derived from contact with the inner world, for example, or contact with the spiritual world, the transcendent world. So these are not listed as sources of suffering, just the contact with the external world. So that should already start to solidify an understanding, a mindset that says, I look at the external world with skepticism. This is, if not certainty, that this is not for me, right? They have a beginning and an end. That is why pleasure turns into suffering. This is something that in chapter 18, Krishna is going to dive into again when he categorizes happiness according to which guna is predominating. So he says, for example, that rajasic happiness is a happiness which is like nectar at first, but ends up like poison. Whereas a sattvic happiness, the ideal happiness, starts off as poison and then becomes nectar. And that is a breathtaking statement, an unbelievable statement, that the higher mode of happiness starts off as poison. It's almost like there is no such thing as day one happiness or happiness from the beginning. Because of the state we find ourselves in, any sincere and genuine path to happiness will begin by a transformation, by a realization, by a self-awareness moment, by a letting go of something which will initially cause us suffering. And so I've had this conversation with several people. For example, one person came to me and said, I feel deeply conflicted. And I said, why? And they said, because I've taken the step to be initiated as a brahmachari, as a monk. And instead of feeling happy after the initiation, I feel sad. And yet I feel like I've done the right decision, but I don't feel happy. That's weird. Something must be wrong. And I said, I completely disagree. This is the happiness that Krishna has outlined in chapter 18. What you are experiencing is you have made the right decision long term. This decision will bear its fruit. It will lead to nectar. But at the present moment, the immediate experience is the bitterness. It's the poison at what you have lost, meaning what you have let go of in order to pursue this nectar. And so the immediate experience, despite knowing you've made the right decision, is pain. It's the same experience anybody feels when they break up with somebody that they know is no longer healthy for them in a relationship. There's a pain for what you're giving up and what you're losing, but you know it's the right decision because there will be nectar at the end of that tunnel. And so this is somehow the same principle that is being taught here. The pleasures that arise from contact with the external world are a source of suffering. So the wise do not rejoice in them. And this puts, I believe, a strong amount of pressure on us as the practitioners, as the seekers. Am I a wise person? Do I want to be a wise person? Because the wise people, they do not rejoice in the pleasures of the external world. And so the question arises, where do I find my pleasure? Where do I search for happiness? And if the answer is anything out here, perhaps I'm being unwise. And the more I've thought about this, the more the conclusion arises, and the more I've conversed with Guruji, the more the conclusion arises that his relationship towards external pleasures is actually quite accommodating and accepting. Anybody who knows Guruji knows that he's not highly dogmatic. He is fully okay with people experiencing external pleasures, so long as they are not the foundation of one's happiness and satisfaction. Meaning, as long as you have yourself and God as the foundation of your happiness, that they are your sources of happiness, and that you don't engage with these things as a means of acquiring happiness, because happiness is already there in your real fundament. Those are just sort of circumstantial experiences that you engage with and let go of, then it's completely fine. He doesn't condemn that at all. And that's the key takeaway that I think really needs to be understood. Let's take a look at Guruji's commentaries, in fact, to this verse. He says, one who takes delight in the sense enjoyment of the outside world, whose mind is always running towards judgment and criticizing everything, will never experience the supreme blissful state, the joy born of dispassion. The bliss which the realized soul attains is far greater than any so-called joy and happiness of the outside reality. Again, incredible statements here. First of all, the bliss which the realized soul attains is far greater than any so-called joy and happiness of the outside reality. So-called. Because people call it happiness, they call it joy. But those who have seen the truth, as the spiritual master has, chapter 4, verse 34, they know that this is a wrong label. This has been mislabeled, right? But the most impressive statement I find in this extract from Guruji's commentary is when he says, the joy born of dispassion, the bliss which the realized soul attains is far greater, etc. So he calls it a joy born of dispassion. And dispassion means what? Because dispassion, so for example, sometimes people don't externally show excitement and passion and happiness in a way that people normally associate happiness with. And so they get labeled as serious people or miserable people or unhappy people. Often those people will get approached and say, are you okay? I'm concerned for you. I haven't seen you smiling, etc., etc. But here Krishna is saying, that's not necessarily a sign of misery or sadness. It can be a sign of dispassion, meaning you are not passionate about the external reality. Your passion lies in the transcendent reality and in the inner reality, the pervading reality, but not in the external shell. And so that person may be experiencing great joy, great bliss, but not in the external domain. And so the joy that is born out of a dispassion towards the externalities of this world, that is the real joy. And that is an unbelievable statement and something that really starts to paint a picture for where we ought to find our sources of happiness and where we ought not to. And when you marry that to the statements that have been made so far, chapters 2, 3, and 4, we have a really clear picture forming about how we have to almost do a 180 and transform our mode of existence in this material world. I am a soul, not a body. Become an observer. I am not the doer of action. The gunas are. Can I influence my gunas? Yes. So act to purify myself. Act to purify my guna combination, my guna configuration. And then understand that in my pursuit of spiritual knowledge, of spiritual realization, all material things become, in a sense, equally uninteresting. They become that sama darshanam, that equal vision. And from that space of dispassion, a true joy will be born from inside, from a real source, not the so-called joy and happiness born of the contact between the senses and the sense objects of the external world. So like the tortoise, I actually retract them, internalize, and find a different source of happiness, whilst cultivating a dispassion towards the externalities that are deceptive in nature. To wrap up chapter 5, verse 23, a person who can resist the impulses arising from desire and anger whilst still in the body is a true yogi and a joyful person. I love how Krishna marries resisting with joy, because often people have this connotation that if I'm resisting my impulses from my desires, then where will I take joy from? I'm just constantly suppressing. But Krishna says it's the opposite. That is the misconception of man. It is by actually following your impulses, allowing your impulses to manifest freely, that you will result in anger. Chapter 2, verse 62 and 63. So you see, what I'm constantly doing in this level 2 course is building bridges between verses and chapters so that we can start to construct a castle of teaching. Because we look at the chapters in isolation, yes, but the Bhagavad Gita is a collection. It's not isolated chapters. And so when we marry, oh yes, 262, 63, he says this, 16 this, he says that, etc., into a coherent vision of the teaching, then we can start to practice that teaching in an accurate and authentic way. So here we see a person who can resist the impulses from desire. Such a person is a true yogi and a joyful person. So joy comes from not allowing yourself to follow that formulaic situation of 262 and 63 that ends up leaving you lost. Joy comes from being able to act in a conscious way, not in an autopilot way, engaging with what you know to be a genuine source of happiness, i.e. yourself or God, and not in the false sources of happiness that bring pleasure at first, but end up being a source of suffering, as Krishna explained in this chapter, and as he once again explains in chapter 18. I want to conclude chapter 5 with a reading from Guruji's commentary on that final verse about resisting impulses and finding true happiness, true joy. So Guruji says, no one is responsible for your happiness or your unhappiness except yourself. You are the cause of your own happiness. When you are surrendered wholeheartedly to God, when your mind, body, and spirit are fully in accordance with the will of God, serving God, meditating on Him, this becomes the source of your true happiness and bliss. But when the mind runs towards the external reality, thinking, yes, this is it, when one is finding great joy in the outside world, this will bring deep sorrow to oneself. The one who enjoys the sense objects automatically becomes evil-minded, greedy, lustful, angry. One will have to go through enormous suffering in life, and even later on, in future lifetimes. And then one will ask, what have I done to God to suffer so much? Why me, and why not my neighbor? Wow, so a lot to unpack here. I won't do all of it, but no one is responsible for your own happiness or unhappiness other than yourself. Why? Because it is a mental state. It is a question of perspective. Secondly, when you are surrendered to God, mind, body, and spirit, fully in accordance with the will of God, serving God, meditating on God, this is the source of your happiness and bliss. So we have identified the source of happiness and bliss, and there's a series of activities that revolve around that source that can allow us to come into contact with it. So we know how to drink from that source. He's given the activities. On the flip side, when the mind runs towards the external reality, thinking, yes, this is it, when one is finding great joy in the outside world, this will bring deep sorrow. Why? Because the higher the climb, the greater the fall. And this is always how it goes. When you fall in love with something so much, but it's something that eventually you will lose, the amount of suffering you will experience for losing that is immense. Imagine if we could lose God, how much we would suffer. So it is our fortune that we cannot. And that is the one massive distinguishing factor between spiritual life and regular material life. In spiritual life, everything you gain, you never lose. So there is no suffering which follows the joy. But in the material life, you may gain incredible things. You may find the best wife, the best husband, the best friend, the best house, the best job, the best child. You may have the best parents. You may find the best pet. You may cook the best meal. But the problem with all of these things is, one day, all of them, inevitably, will be taken from you, either by their death or by yours. And as great as the love was, that great shall the suffering be. And so that is what Guruji is speaking on, and that is what he's saying. That therefore becomes a source of your suffering. And because of this, people become resentful. They become evil-minded sometimes, greedy, lustful, angry, to lose what they love, to lose what they so desire. And then imagine, even before losing it, the constant fear of losing it. There are so many layers to this. And then, when that moment comes, the final part of his commentary, nobody will be self-aware enough. Nobody will be situated, firmly established in their wisdom, as Krishna explained at the end of chapter 2. By retreating into the shell like the tortoise, you become firmly established in your wisdom. If you let the senses run free, chasing their sense objects, then you do not become firmly established in your wisdom. And so in those moments, how do you speak? You say, what have I done to God to suffer? You blame God. Why me and why not my neighbor? You try to put it onto someone else. You make comparisons. You call out injustices, but you don't take responsibility because your clarity of vision is gone. Chapter 2, 62 and 63. So these are powerful statements, a powerful chapter, really pushing us towards resisting the impulses that come from our desires, seeing what is the true pursuit of life, that I do nothing. There's a material play going on, but I am separate from it, and I am in pursuit of that. And in light of that pursuit, all material things become equally uninteresting to me. Sama darshanam, if it is the cow, the dog eater, the brahmana, it doesn't matter. Are you my Atma? Are you Bhagavan? Are you my soul? Are you God? No, then you're equally of no interest to me. And that is no different than every other statement Krishna made earlier of being indifferent to hot or cold, pleasure or pain. That is chapter 5. Jai Gurudev.